So last night, I saw the movie Anemone, written and directed by Ronan Day-Lewis, starring and co-written by Daniel Day-Lewis, which is pretty crazy. Unfortunately, there's a lot to talk about with how much visual symbolism Ronan and his father Daniel have included in their movie to get across these very family-related and historical themes, like the glowing spirit creature, the ice ball storm, the anemone flower, and the mother floating above the bed. And I want to break down every symbol and theme in this movie from the very beginning to the very end. So to break this movie down, we're going to use 3 themes. 1, unconditional love. We'll discuss the film's inspiration, Ray's wife, Ray's son, Ray and Jem's childhoods, and the scene between Ray and Jem with no words. 2, legacies of war. We'll discuss the opening sequence of drawings, the Irish and British conflict, Jem's faith, and the graphic priest story. And 3, abandonment of faith. We'll discuss the reason for Ray's self-exile, Ray's wife floating above the bed, the anemone flower, the glowing spirit creature, the ice ball storm, the big dead fish, and the ending when Ray returns home. And so much more. Hope you enjoy. Theme number 1, unconditional love. With a movie as wildly symbolic and deeply thematic as this one, I want to start this analysis with some insight from writer-director Ronan Day-Lewis on what inspired him to make this film. I had for years this kind of vague sense of wanting to write something about brotherhood and find a way into that kind of archetype. I have 2 brothers, and I think there's this sort of beauty and tragedy to brotherhood, and just that kind of volatility where things can veer between love and rage in a matter of seconds that I was really fascinated with. And Ronan goes on in the interview to describe how this dynamic between the brothers was eventually expanded in the writing process to include a mother and a son as well. And now with the movie we see these conflicted feelings of resentment and unconditional love are present within all 4 of the characters in this movie. Nessa has been haunted for 20 plus years by Ray's absence and silence. She's conflicted with devastation, yet also loves him unconditionally enough to send him letters that she knows he never responds to. Brian resents his father for abandoning him and leaving his mother so broken mentally and emotionally. However, again, Brian's unconditional love has him defending his father from those who speak poorly on his name, and even looking into joining the army to follow in his father's footsteps. And although Jem has stepped in as a new father figure and live-in partner, he too notices that void that eats away at Nessa as a wife and Brian as a son, and him as an older brother, which pushes him to visit his brother Ray as a final cry for his return. And once Jem arrives at Ray's tiny cabin in the woods in that first encounter, we witness an even deeper history of conflicting feelings: resentment and love, frustration and relief, camaraderie and hostility, guilt and blame. And this expression of inner conflicted feelings between the 2 brothers goes on the entire scene without a single word spoken until the very end. And Ronan, in that same New York Film Festival interview, expands on this idea. I think my father and I both were really interested in the sense of silence and just how siblings can have this almost telepathic communication with each other, and how many different silences can exist between brothers and between siblings. And I love that he included this detail in the film because it's very true, and it comes across through with the very talented actors, that when you have a brother or very close family members, there are these little looks and shrugs and squints and glares and little facial and body expressions that our family members can read way before we say a single word. Through their words, we learn about their tragic childhood and upbringing with a violently abusive father and a sexually abusive priest, and eventually both joining the British Army. But beneath their words, we learn so much more. We learn about the jealousy Ray had of his brother growing up, having been the tougher, more respected one. For example, never being abused by the priest who abused Ray, and now having those envious feelings solidified, feeling Jem has even stole his family from him now at this point. And this theme of broken childhood and upbringing is a through-running theme from brother and father, Jem and Ray, to son, Brian, symbolized by this childlike handwriting in the title and text cards throughout the film. The silent scene mentioned earlier also finishes with Jem handing Ray a cricket clicker, with the first and last 2 words in the scene from Ray saying, "Our inheritance." A cricket clicker is a device used in war to communicate in the dark through simple coded clicks. That simple exchange of the cricket clicker and the line, "Our inheritance," represents a major theme for this family and this story. With an abusive father, rough upbringing, and traumatic experiences in war, the 2 are left as adults with barely anything. just a series of dark memories inherited by the generations before them. And I want to expand even further on who these generations are in theme number 2, Legacies of War. So in the film, as mentioned before, we learn that Ray and Jem joined the British Army years ago to fight in Northern Ireland, and they were both haunted by many of the horrific things they saw. And what the two brothers are referring to is the war in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. The origins of the conflict can be traced back hundreds of years, but the film is primarily referring to the conflict beginning in the late 1960s. To summarize as briefly as I can, the minority Catholics of Northern Ireland faced a lot of adversity, mistreatment, and unfairness under Northern Ireland's British rule, which largely favored the majority Protestants. Eventual civil rights protests from the Catholics were met with extremely harsh punishment by the British, and the tension and violence escalated into some of the most devastating and tragic moments in history. And this entire conflict of death, destruction, and terror is rooted in differences in religion and identity, dating back through those hundreds of years of British oppression. And this history thematically sets the stage for the mentality and beliefs of our two brothers regarding religion, identity, and values, which is exactly why the film starts with a visual retracing of these historical events. We see the division of territory, the Irish protesters, the British oppressors, and the escalation of chaos symbolized by an endless series of flames. And it's this legacy of oppression and violence that sends through this sickness of intergenerational trauma from grandfather to father and brother to son. And because the fight is so rooted in religion, we see how the effects of this war have an impact on their beliefs as individuals. We hear from their conversations they grew up in a strictly religious household, but only Jem has remained attached to his religion, while Ray seems to have lost his faith. The very first we see of Jem is his religious tattoos as he prays for himself, his family, and the trip ahead. When he arrives, Ray mocks him for when he says grace, pointing out the perceived ironies in his beliefs, and proudly recollecting that incredibly graphic payback story that he had on their abusive priest. Altogether, it's this complete abandonment of everything he once stood for, and more importantly, what he once fought for as a soldier, and what the generations before him fought for. And when we consider the historical context of the Troubles conflict, and his one life-altering decision that's revealed near the end of the movie, everything comes together symbolically and thematically. So let's explore what that decision was in theme number 3, abandonment of faith. So nearing the end of the film on the beach, Ray reveals why he abandoned his family and self-exiled for so many years. As a soldier, his team was investigating a bomb maker for the Irish Republican Army, who suddenly set off an accidental explosion. The bomb maker died, and his apprentice was so brutally injured he would clearly eventually die too. To put him out of his misery, Ray shot him. However, since the young man was unarmed, he was considered a non-combatant, which makes it a war crime to kill him. And when Ray confessed to his superiors, they made sure it was covered up. So the traumatic experience of killing the defenseless young man and then seeing his team sweep it away was so emotionally staggering and psychologically scarring. The guilt and shame for that moment and everything leading up to it drove him to question why he was who he was, why he was fighting, why his country was fighting, what he believed in, who he believed he was fighting for. And the realization that his faith, his values, and his beliefs led him to that decision created so much guilt that he punished himself into exile, not only abandoning his current life and family, but abandoning his faith, his love for God, his love for his neighbor, and his love for himself. And this realization for the audience into Ray's mind allows us to interpret so much of the symbolic imagery that we've been so confused about along the whole film. So let's go through some of those examples to disentangle as many of them as we can. The British oppression we discussed before, which Ray is now ashamed of, tragic events in history inseparable from his religion. Ray endlessly running further and further away as his brother tires out, abandoning the family line he's ashamed of. Ray walking from right to left across a closed amusement park, symbolically revisiting a broken childhood under darkness and silence, no longer glowing as bright as it used to. Ray seeing his wife in his dream, identical to the Polaroid photo in his lockbox, ironically representative of him being haunted by his loved ones. The letters from Nessa, written in love, follow him like demon spirits floating above him in his sleep. And most notably, the anemone, a flower strongly tied to Greek myth, said to have sprung from the tears of Aphrodite as she mourned Adonis after his death, making it a symbol historically of forgotten and abandoned love. And in one of the most bizarre symbols in the film, Ray sees this strange spirit across the water in almost this mammal form with male genitals, a human face, and a beating heart-like organ. When Ronan was asked about this at the New York Film Festival screening, he simply said it came from his paintings. In Ronan's gallery of paintings he's created, this is a recurring figure. He can't exactly describe in words what it means, but he says it's more so an expression of a feeling rather than a directly symbolic image. So after hearing that, within the context of the film, I'd say it's representative of life and the human spirit. The one thing Ray has completely detached himself from, and is realizing he's lost without. He even audibly questions if this creature is his son. He even added that the weather itself was also written in an expressionist painting fashion, as the weather directly reflected the emotions of our characters as the film went along, most notably the ice ball hailstorm, signifying the breaking of an old mold, and the prevailing sunshine signifying a new, much more open state of mind for Ray. And the last major symbol finalizing that change of mind was the massive, wounded dead fish floating down the river. Of course, being a more overt symbol of the lifeless path Ray may continue to live in exile, simply drifting through time, forever wounded and completely alone. This series of moments strikes a chord, leading to a fight with Jem, and in defeat, coming to the inevitable conclusion that it's a pointless task to fight his history, his family, and his values. It will always have the upper hand, psychologically. And when Ray finally arrives at his home, over 20 years later, a moment of unconditional love washes over both him and his son, in one more silent, chaotic exchange of emotions. A return to peace and forgiveness in one son and oneself. Alright, this is my analysis. I'd love to discuss any of your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'm sure you enjoyed seeing Daniel Day-Lewis as much as I did. I thought it was great, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.